I was 19 years old when I found out I had depression. Everything in my life was great, and yet the wheels of my life came off. I had this roommate whose name was Matt Boone. He's now a pastor in Tennessee, and he saved my life. He was brave enough to know that something was wrong. And he saw me in the midst of my darkness, and he called a good friend of his mentor, Jeff Woodard. Now, Jeff is an event planner and a decorator in southern Oklahoma, and he had mentored Matt all through high school. Lay high school leaders, if you ever wondered if you matter, let me tell you that there are very few callings with as much impact as youth leaders who volunteer their time to teach kids and to tell them they love them. Now, Jeff, after hearing from Matt that I wasn't doing well and I was sleeping all the time, immediately drove 2 hours north to our apartment. And here is the part of the story I remember the most. Jeff, without judgment, without question, came into our house. He came into my room and he crawled up next to me in bed. And he and Matt and I just laid there silently. Silently, these two friends saw past my facade, they saw past my walls, and physically they held space for me. Now, this is the beginning of my story of depression. Now, 20 plus years later, I know my own illness. I know my therapist, and I know what medication works for me. Now, I often wonder if I were in the time of Jesus, if I would have been one of those people who were believed to have had demons. Because my attitude changed so abruptly when it seemed to those around me, and it seemed even in my own life that all was going right, yet I was in my darkest space. This darkness, or one similar, is where Jesus first met Mary Magdalene. Now, who was Mary Magdalene? What do we know about her? See, the writer of the Gospel of Luke tells us that she was from Galilee, probably from the village of Magdala, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Magdala no longer exists. There's only a few foundation stones that remain. And we know that on Jesus' Galilean mission, Jesus and the 12 disciples were accompanied by several women, including Mary Magdalene, who had been cured of 7 demons. Joanna, the wife of Chuza, and the manager of Herod's household, and Susanna, and many others. Now, these women were helping to support them out of their means. It's interesting to note that Jesus and his disciples didn't support themselves by miracles. Rather, they received support from grateful people, including Mary Magdalene. And Jesus was able to do the work he did because these women fiscally supported him. This was a story of Mary that I never heard a sermon preached about when I was growing up. Now, unfortunately, Mary has been associated with the unnamed reformed prostitute. In Luke, the one who crashed the dinner party and breaks the bottle of perfume and anoints Jesus' feet. It was Pope Gregory in 560 who got creative in a sermon and declared that Mary was the forgiven and reformed prostitute. I was even taught that in Sunday school. That's unfortunate because it actually has no biblical basis. Sue reminds us in our reading today that sometimes the stories told about us are false, and they create image that haunts us. So this morning, let's set the record straight for what the Bible actually says about Mary. Now, Mary is mentioned in all 4 Gospels. She was present for some of the most central occasions in Jesus' life, particularly his death on the cross, his burial, and his resurrection. In the new hymnal of the ELCA, Mary is given the title of Apostle to the Apostles. Now, we borrowed that title from an early Christian leader, Bernard of Clairvaux. This title helps us remember what an honor was given to her by Jesus at that time of the resurrection. The first place that we see Mary mentioned is in this text in Luke 8. Here we meet these women who have been healed of demons and have been transformed by Jesus. And I'm not really sure if those were ailments, mental health crises, broken, deemed by the world of that day as spirits invading her body. But much of what was considered demonic in the time of Jesus would now be recognized as mental health issues. So whatever the reality, Jesus met her in the middle of her crisis. He stepped in with compassion, like my friend Matt and Jeff, and he set her free from what was destroying her. And then she followed him. Not only did she follow him, but she actually gave of her finances to make sure Jesus could do for others what he had done for her. He could see beyond the chaos and the mess of her life and gave her her true identity. So as long as she was with Jesus, she was healed. In Mary, we see the disciple that Manning speaks of when he says, there is beautiful transparency to honest disciples who never wear a false face and don't pretend to be anything but who they are. One of the most profound readings we find in the Bible about Mary Magdalene is the story that Sue read for us today. We know that Mary was at the crucifixion of Jesus, and it was catastrophic for her. This is the space with which Mary heads to the tomb that night. Mary went to the tomb early in the morning, expecting to anoint the dead body with oil, and instead, she found an empty tomb. And she reported this to disciples, and they came running to see for themselves, not believing her tale. And Mary was destroyed. Not only had the man who saw her, who entered into her pain and suffering and set her free, now been crucified on the cross and buried in this tomb, but now after all of that, someone had stolen his body before Mary was able to anoint him. And Mary, standing outside of the tomb weeping because that's all she could do, is distracted with her grief. And so because of this grief, when Jesus speaks to her, she's so overwhelmed that she doesn't even recognize him. She mistakes him for the gardener. Jesus asks, "Why are you weeping? And whom do you seek?" See, these are two questions that universally apply to every broken heart. Why are you sad? Why are you weeping? Who are you seeking? Now, Jesus asked this because she needs to recognize in this rabbinic way of questioning that this gardener is actually her rabbi. And once Mary recognizes Jesus, she's healed again and set free for a second time in her life by Jesus. And she clings to him, not wanting to let go, but Jesus at that moment ordains her as the apostle to the apostles. He gives her a task to tell the disciples the good news that Jesus is alive, resurrected. Having ripped down the gates of hell, he's back to tear down Mary and the disciples' walls once again, but this time, it's for good. Now, the title apostle actually just means the one who's sent. Mary was sent by Jesus for the purpose and with a message to be the apostle to the apostles. Why does it matter to me that Mary Magdalene is the first disciple that Jesus ordains to announce the good news of the resurrection? To go and tell the others, he says to Mary. To go and tell. This commissioning of Mary Magdalene may be one of the most empowering moments for women in the Bible. Now, in his grace, Jesus released her from her struggles. In his grace, Jesus empowers Mary to follow him. In his grace, Jesus gives Mary a voice. And to be given a voice matters, especially when your voice was taken by society. To be heard matters, especially when the apostles that you're walking alongside ignore you. To be believed matters, especially when you spend your life being overlooked. This is an extremely important act of empowerment for Mary, but also for all women. Go and tell. His first call to a disciple after the resurrection is to a woman. He calls Mary Magdalene to lift her voice in thanksgiving and praise for the resurrection, for all that God offers of salvation and love to. See, this is what God's grace does. Grace sets us free. So are you feeling bound? Are you carrying shame for mental illness for which you have no control? Let it go. Are you bound by patterns, by addictions, by cycles? You can be freed. Have you bought into the stories told about you? Let them go. See, the same God that healed Mary Magdalene can heal us too. Yes, medication and medicine may be a part of setting you free, but Jesus meets us there too. So are you the woman who has been told the truth and, like the disciples did to Mary, where you turned away? Jesus believes you. And I believe you. And the church will hear your voice. See, grace gives you a voice. Grace hears. Grace calls you. And here's the best part. Grace sends you. Amen.